It's very good to see you, Aviva.
It's always good to see you. I love
So
our talks.
look, they're the highlight of my time at Heritage.
Oh, thank you.
Don't tell anybody else.
I won't. No one's going to watch this and know that.
So, we're obviously here to talk about the November 5th American Art Signatures Auction. And behind us are some pretty signature pieces in any auction or any museum or anybody's home for that matter.
It's true.
So, I don't know where to begin in as much as that everything behind us is kind of a classic, but obviously looming over our shoulders is the Norman Rockwell Home for Thanksgiving.
That's right.
The cover of the Thanksgiving issue of the Saturday Evening Post in 1945. One of Rockwell's most beloved homecoming pieces during that period of transitioning from wartime to peace.
Yeah.
Homecoming GI certainly has become an iconic piece. This one is certainly no less so. So I want to ask you something.
Yeah.
I think it's very, very important that people understand where this came from, because it has a story that is Rockwellian all of its own.
It really is. And it's funny that anytime a major Rockwell is in the limelight, if it's being sold anywhere, I find that there is usually this really Rockwellian story that comes with it. That's just part and parcel of who Rockwell is, because remember that illustration was never really intended to be hung on the walls as fine art, right? So when these were all made, after they were used, they sort of disappear sometimes. You've heard crazy stories about Rockwell's being found in walls of homes, coming from basements of Curtis Publishing.
Was it his custom to offer the subjects of his paintings the pieces after they were published?
So I've heard that a lot. I know for sure that he has gifted a bunch of them to models, to editors that he's worked with. So yes, I don't know if he did it always, but it was something that he did pretty regularly.
Okay. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Which is the case of what happened here. So this is classic Rockwell in that, you know, to us, these are not famous people. There's an ex-military guy with his mother, and they're peeling potatoes, and he's looking like a little child sitting like that on the chair, and his mother's looking so proud, and it's a scene that we're all familiar with.
Rockwell described it as a son who's doing kitchen patrol, something you'd hate to do in the military, but he's only too happy to be doing it because he's sitting next to his mother, returned home from war.
He's at peace.
Yes.
He's at peace.
And she's delighted that he has survived the war and come home to him.
I mean, there's a very simple narrative going on in this painting, but there's so much that's being said just in their two facial expressions. But with Rockwell, you always do find stories like this, as we just started saying, that they come out of the woodwork in strange and fascinating ways. And this painting is one that I'm familiar with because I've seen it in exhibitions before. Mm-hmm. I've seen it at the Rockwell Museum. I've seen it at the Rockwell Four Freedoms tour that traveled to the New York Historical Society. I saw it there. I saw it in Houston. I saw it in DC.
It's been to France.
It went to Normandy, which is interesting actually because Rockwell is one of the only artists outside of America in the arena of American art that's celebrated as a global important artist, right, which is interesting, and that's, I think, why it went to Normandy. But so I was familiar with the work. It's heavily reproduced. I think they have mugs of this work at the Rockwell Museum. But when I discovered it, I was actually up at the Rockwell Museum for a gala, and the director at that time called me out and asked me to come into the basement to the storage facility, which I've been to many times over the past 20 years. I was not prepared to see this work that day. I literally stopped my heart, and it was 10 o'clock at night after the gala, and I was like texting my colleagues in Dallas and in California, and they're like, okay, you gotta stop. And I said, you don't understand, this is a life-changing Rockwell for me. I felt my heart stopped when I saw it. And when I knew that it was in play and that we could potentially sell it, I knew in my bones that this picture had to be sold at Heritage. And I've said this to you many times, because Rockwell is the great American illustrator, the great American storyteller, collected heavily by our national treasures, George Lucas and Steven Spielberg. He's Americana. Everybody knows Rockwell.
Right.
Even my family members who don't know anything about art, everybody knows Rockwell, right?
Yes.
So to see this, and to see this picture, know that it's coming into play, I just knew that Heritage is, of course, America's auction house, right? We are almost the creators of the high-end field of comic art, of illustration art, of narrative art. We do a lot with historical at Heritage. And I love Rockwell, and everybody at Heritage loves Rockwell. So I knew that this is the kind of picture that we could handle it in such a respectful way that is fitting to this masterwork.
So let's talk about how the Rockwell Museum had it, because they were basically just the caretakers for a American Legion post in Winchton, Massachusetts.
That's right.
Which was gifted the piece in the 1950s by a Catholic priest who had got it from Rockwell about 2 years after it was painted.
Right.
So talk to me about that experience and the post, because the post is auctioning it because they simply need the funds to take care of this building that was built in the 1950s.
Yeah.
Actually, originally when they acquired the Rockwell, it was gifted by this priest, Father Tisdale, who had a boat, had a place in Winchton. Yes. I mean, the story itself, to me, the evolution of this piece, the backstory behind it, the fact that this is a real-life mother and son in the piece behind us.
They're actually Rockwell's milkman and his mother.
That was Rockwell's milkman. He had a dairy farm in Vermont.
That's right.
He was a war hero. Had flown dozens of missions while in the army. He flew in D-Day.
That's right.
They initially did not want to sit for the painting. Right. Rockwell paid them $15 to do it. And that was life-changing money in 1945, or at least a pretty nice amount of money.
Sure.
So they didn't want to sit for it. He convinced them to do so. And he didn't want the painting. The soldier didn't want the painting. So the priest wound up with it.
Right.
They're building the American Legion post. And the American Legion post, the priest gets wind of it and says, take any painting you want, to the guys who were in the middle of trying to build it.
Which, by the way, this sounds like a movie already.
Yeah, he says, take any painting you want from this boat that he had built in the cliffs of a lake in Winchton.
I know.
So the story is extraordinary in and of itself.
Right.
The post, for decades, hung it in a hallway where anyone could have stolen it because they did not know that it was real.
Isn't that amazing? And it sort of reminds me, it's funny that this is happening and we're selling this painting because we sold a Rockwell study a few years back of an umpire checking the weather.
Right.
And at that time also, the family who were descendants of the umpire depicted in that scene thought that it was a print. So they thought they were bringing it to us to put in one of our online sales. And then of course it turned out to be this original, and we sold it for $1.68 million, which stands as the record for an oil study by the artist.
Right.
So to hear that they thought that they did not have an original is sort of classic for us at this point. It's fun. It's newly rediscovered. It's a scene out of a movie.
Well, the only way they knew that it was real was because someone walked in and said, I'll give you $500 for it. They're like, why would you give us $500 for a reproduction?
That's right. And they brought it to the Rockwell Museum.
Which was just 2 hours away from the post.
Yes.
Which is
in the middle of nowhere.
Right.
The painting, Winchton, when I drove there to meet with the fellows at the Legion, at the post, as I got closer and closer to the post, the streets kept getting smaller. There were less and less stoplights. I felt as if I was driving into a Norman Rockwell painting. And it felt great. It felt like America. And I was really excited to meet the clients. And when I got there, we just had fun. And we talked about the painting, and everyone's really excited about it. I mean, these are all military vets. These are heroes. These are American heroes. And when I sat with them at a round table to pitch selling this painting for them, I felt unbelievably patriotic. I felt responsible to continue the legacy of this painting, not only for Rockwell and not only for this painting and not only for Richard and his mother Sarah, but for all of these guys in our military, America's military. I felt like I was part of that story. And so I felt a very strong and urgent need to be the one to sell this painting.
So talk to me about, this piece and the entire Homecoming series of sort of an informal series in 1945-46. It certainly was Rockwell had done World War I paintings kind of similar, but he certainly
we sold one last season.
Right, but he certainly hadn't found his voice.
Absolutely.
He had by this time really become the Norman Rockwell that we identify him as.
Well, that's right. And artistically, his style has changed also, which is why the 40s, this period in 50s, are his most desirable period. And all the works that have sold at auction for, 10 million, 45 million, are all from this period.
Right.
And with Rockwell, as you know, Robert, since you've studied Rockwell at this point.
I have become something of an avid Rockwell scholar.
You have quite the impressive library, I must say. But which is how you do everything. But you know that with his post covers, and he painted over 300 post covers, the earlier works have a very rigid, almost stiff composition.
They're very stilted. in a lot of
Very
ways.
stilted. They look a little bit more like a Leyendecker.
In fact, the weird thing is that Leyendecker almost looks like one of those early Rockwells.
That's exactly right, because they were confined by the design of the post cover. So it was a white cover with the black borders, which is where the words would go in, and Rockwell adhered to those standards at the beginning. But once he became so famous and almost larger than life, you know, his covers were stars. People waited and were excited to see his post covers as we are when we go to the movies today, or the way we did before the pandemic. But we'll get back to that. But he flushed the format, so to speak, and then he had this creative free reign, and that's where he really found his voice and covers the entire composition. It just becomes much more engaging. It literally, to me, looks like a film still. And
well, I mean, that's the case, right?
Well, that's it. That's right.
It's interesting because when his work did travel, and because this actually is included in the discussion about when the Spielberg and the Lucas paintings went on tour.
That's right.
This was often referenced because this looks like something from the best years of our lives.
That's exactly right. And Steven Spielberg has said on the record that he has based a number of his film stills, his cinematography, on specific Rockwell works. Mm-hmm. You see it in Saving Private Ryan, you've seen it in Empire of the Sun, and so that is why a work like this is so important. It's from the best period. It's got the great magical story. It's first time coming up for sale. The people selling it are military heroes. It's a depiction of a military hero. It's a depiction of Rockwell's milkman, and it's in pristine condition. So it is, and I use this term a lot with you, Robert, but it is the holy grail. It is one of the holy grails of Norman Rockwell.
Of all the Rockwells that you have been fortunate enough to have been part of the sale of, is this the top?
No question.
Really?
Yeah. This is a career high for me.
Yeah?
Because I love illustration art. That's no secret. I swore I would sell the first Leyendecker for 7 figures. I predicted that 12 years ago, did it last season. I've wanted to sell this painting since maybe for 20 years.
Right.
So when I was shown the work, I almost had a heart attack. I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. It's actually sort of strange, and it's all very Rockwellian when I'm about to tell you, but 6 weeks before I saw this painting, my grandmother passed away, and she knew how much I loved Rockwell, and my grandfather was a World War II veteran who looked very much like Richard in that picture. So when I saw that picture, I felt this moment of, this is my grandmother sending me this picture. So it feels very personal for me also, and it's just a great picture. So objectively and subjectively, I'm very excited to sell this picture.
So they're bracketed, that Rockwell here is bracketed by 2 Leyendeckers.
Yes.
Certainly they are very much, when you think of the golden age of American illustration, they are the alpha and beta.
Oh yeah.
So, having sold the 7-figure Leyendecker earlier this year,
That's right, over 4 million.
I assume that brought out folks who said, you know what, I've got a Leyendecker sitting around that...
Oh yes, listen, that always happens. And I teach appraisal and valuation at a graduate school, and I always tell them that if you've got one big price, that's an exception, that's a blip, that's exciting, right? But one big sale does not change a market. You got a couple of those, and then you're seeing a trend.
Yeah.
But once you begin to see a number of works hitting that high 6- and 7-figure market, then you see a new marketplace. So, and I believe very strongly that we are in the process of seeing Leyendecker's market change pretty aggressively.
Tell me why. Tell me what it is about Leyendecker and why now.
Leyendecker was the predecessor to Rockwell as the Saturday Evening Post illustrator. He was older than Rockwell. Rockwell felt very competitive with him. Mm-hmm. He's a genius. I've said this to you many times. I believe that Leyendecker is one of the most undervalued American painters, period.
Undervalued, underrated, underappreciated,
all
the unders.
But that's changing. So there was just a documentary at the Tribeca Film Festival on Leyendecker. We just sold it for $4.2 million. And I am seeing some fantastic Leyendeckers coming out of the woodwork. So after we sold the football hero last season, I was offered at least 15 covers that are all 6 figures, that all have potential to get huge prices, top 10 prices for the artist. But I feel very responsible for keeping the integrity of the artist marketplace, and I feel very responsible for raising the bar slowly and steadily and making it a permanent market. So I knew that I had a very heavy responsibility on picking the right works to sell this season.
So why these 2?
Well, I thought it would be very interesting to show two military scenes side by side by Rockwell and by Leyendecker. So whereas we've got this World War II scene right here, with Leyendecker we've got a World War I scene of a French military man bestowing an honor, the Croix de Guerre, which is a very important.
You've been practicing.
I've been practicing, yes. I'm from New York. I took some high school level French, but I think I got it right.
I'm just glad you didn't make me say it.
Exactly. So I just thought it would be really interesting to tell the story together of World War I, World War II. It's Americana, it's American, it's perfect for heritage. So I knew early on, this is one of the first ones we had signed up. We also have a really fun one that's not in this room as well, but it just shows Leyendecker's sort of more playful side. It's a clown with a poodle. It just shows his mastery at, a simple narrative. I've said this to you again. Leyendecker is the master of restraint to me, and you could see that here. Whereas with Rockwell, even if it's a film still, there's a whole story being told. Leyendecker tends to be a little bit more interested not only in the narrative, but in the style, in the depiction of the ideal human being. So if you look at the work Summer on the end here, I was so excited to sell that one. Because
that was also a cover.
That was also, these are two Saturday Evening Post covers. This one is from the teens, that was from the 20s. It's interesting to have them both in the sale together because you see actually, not only is it interesting to see Leyendecker in different lights, very different subject matters, but you also see how he's using more color here, and that had to do with the printing and the capabilities available to him in doing his covers. He was able to use more covers.
But his style also wildly changed in just a short amount of time. I mean, it kind of goes from, this very sort of formal piece you see in the teens to, The Great Gatsby behind me.
The Great Gatsby, exactly. It reminds me of The Great Gatsby. Well, we all know that Rockwell was interested in the everyman. Mm-hmm. He was interested in showing the soldier next door. Leyendecker, of course, did that if that was what was commissioned of him, but he really loved to show the upper class. This is the talented Mr. Ripley. Man. He was a fancy man. Listen, he did illustrations for House of Kuppenheimer. He did illustrations for Arrow Shirts. He was a dapper man himself. Mm-hmm. He was drawn to the dapper circles in New York. He loved luxury. He reminds me of Ralph Lauren in a way.
Right.
In that he wanted to capture this beautiful, beautiful men and women. Beautiful clothing, beautiful bodies, beautiful sun, shining on their bodies. Look at that man. This is an Adonis. I mean, any man or woman at any age can look at that Leyendecker and say, I want to be in that scene.
What's interesting is I always thought, when I first saw that, I thought that was an ad, because he was obviously well known for his ads, but I thought that was one of his ads.
Well, I've thought the same, because he was always thinking about promoting a brand, whatever that is.
But the brand became him
the brand became him. I mean, look at the textures that he captures in that. The silks, the woman's headscarf, the shimmer of it. It looks like silk. You can almost feel the textures, the differing textures in that. You can see the sun coming through, that sun-dappled look of the sun umbrella. You can see the shine. You can see the suntan lotion, the oil on their skin. And he's a genius at that. And why is he not achieving seven figures regularly? He should be. He's a genius.
Well, I would certainly think the film is not going to hurt his legacy and reputation.
I think you're right.
So we're surrounded by illustration art in this room.
Yes.
Obviously, there's not just illustration art in the American Art Auction.
No.
But I have gotten the sense in the time that I've known you that it has become something of which you are incredibly enamored. As illustration art begins to achieve the prominence of more familiar American artists, people you go to see at museums.
Yes.
These to you are the pieces that speak as much to you as any,
they
Thomas
do,
Hart Benton.
But it's not just me. It's interesting to me if you look at some very important and revolutionary contemporary artists, like Richard Prince, for instance. They collect illustration art. What does that say? I think it's always interesting to me, an artist's artist, what they are drawn to. And I really do love illustration art. And American art, our category is very unique in the arena of fine art handled at auction, because some categories are very specific. But American art, and this is what drew me to work in the field, is that not only is it a syllabus of American art history, but it's really a syllabus of American history.
Sure.
And so in our sale coming up in a few weeks, we have everything from early sort of colonial era portraits, Hudson River School, Impressionism, Western, all the way up in illustration, all the way up until early American modernism.
Right.
And I love that about my category because it speaks to me. I think there's so many aspects of all of us that can relate to every single portion of our catalog. But illustration art very, very much resonates with me because it tells the story of our nation.
Mm-hmm.
I feel very patriotic when I sell American art, which
Really?
we've discussed. Yes. My father's a first generation American, and I think illustration art is one of the only unique categories within American art that is very unique to America. Europe does modernism, Europe does impressionism, Europe does landscapes, Europe does tonalism. Obviously there are some illustrators in Europe, we've handled them, but nothing comes close to illustration art of America.
Right.
I feel very proud of that. Because let's remember, Europeans tend to poo-poo American art. You know, they look down their nose at it. You can't look down your nose at illustration art. It's the Mac Daddy, it's America. I love that.
Mac Daddy.
Yes, that's the technical term.
I was going to say, is that something you teach in school?
Yes.
This is the Mac Daddy of American art.
It's right, that's right.
But I'll say this. Speaking of the Mac Daddy,
yes.
As a father, I have often read to my son, Maurice Sendak, who sits over your right shoulder.
Yes.
Talk to me about the Wild Things.
I am so excited to have this painting, this work on paper in our sale, because Maurice Sendak, find me a child in this country, in the world perhaps, that is not familiar with where the wild things are. It's the great unifier, right? We've all been read bedtime stories. We've all been scared of the dark. Sendak is such a national treasure. He's a global treasure. He's a Jewish New Yorker who is also a son of immigrants, which I've learned actually, if you look at his monsters, these are all very unique characters that he's created. And remember that Sendak not only was an illustrator, but he did costume design, he did set design. He always wanted to tell a story that was sort of over the top. And he based these characters on his older immigrant aunts and uncles who used to come up to him and squeeze his cheeks and say, "I want to eat you." And so actually, his characters all have names like Moshe, like Bernard. Moshe is Maurice in Yiddish. So it's a very personal story that I relate to as a family of immigrants. That resonates with me. I think that it resonates with a lot of Americans. But sure. Sendak is such a genius in that he created monsters that want to eat you as a comforting child story, because he sort of broke down barriers of that. He gets into the child's mind. He understands how children think. And it doesn't matter. I mean, Steven Spielberg gets this with E.T. and things like that. You're always a child. You always have your inner child in you, right? Mm-hmm. Don't we learn in therapy? I'm speaking as a New Yorker now. Don't in therapy, it always comes back to your childhood, right? So
as a Texan, I have no idea what you mean.
I'm sure. But I love that. And so Sendak, really great Where the Wild Things Are illustrations do not come up that often.
That was made for an exhibition, correct?
It was made for an exhibition in Chicago for the Art Institute of Chicago. So Sendak, Where the Wild Things Are, his characters from that are the feather in his cap. I mean, I think that's one of his most important achievements. And he knew that. And he created these characters early on in his career, 40s, 50s is when he was illustrating them. But he used them, he repeated them over and over throughout the rest of his career. So this illustration was actually done for a poster to be hung in the Children's Learning Museum at the Art Institute of Chicago. I love that. He really wanted to bring it to the public. And so what you're seeing here is one of his most famous images that he's revisiting, his characters, but he made it for a specific use for the Art Institute of Chicago, which has some of the most important, they have Grant Wood, American Gothic, they have some of the most important American art in the world. So to know that this was commissioned for the Art Institute, I love that.
Yeah.
And also, once we signed up this Rockwell, and once we had these Leyendeckers, I was on a mission. I wanted to tell a story. I wanted to have a very complete syllabus of illustration art. So I knew I had to get this Sendak. I'm very excited about it. I knew we had to get a Ludwig Bemelmans, which we did. But it goes further than that. In this sale, you will see, our catalog will present as a textbook on the history and evolution of Golden Age illustration. We've got N.C. Wyeth. We've got Howard Pyle, who founded the Brandywine School. The N.C. Wyeth comes to us from the estate of Mort Walker, who was the illustrator of Beetle Bailey. So it tells such a great story of the history of illustration. So we've got that. We've got Jessie Wilcox Smith, the great woman of the golden age of illustration, her illustration for 'Twas the Night Before Christmas. So we've got really important material in this sale.
Right.
It's a story that needs to be told. And what's amazing is that bidding has not even, we're weeks away from bidding opening, and we are already getting inquiries on these lots because this is a moment in illustration art and it's natural. You said to me after our last auction, which we thought would achieve 5 or 6 million, and it sold for almost $11 million. You said, what do you got in the pipeline for the next sale? And I said, you're only as good as your last sale.
Right.
And I already knew that some of these were in the works and they were in the pipeline, but I knew that we had to, as America's Auction House, continue that. We had to continue the tradition of being the leaders in the fields of illustration art. And I believe that we achieved our goal with this auction.
Tell me about the Madeline. I know you love it.
Oh God, I wish I could buy this. Let me tell you something. I remember my mother and father reading me this. I remember it as a child. In the middle of the night, Miss Clavel turned on the light and said, something is not right. That's what happened when Madeline got her appendix rupture. Oh, I mean, it's part and parcel of my childhood. This image of the girls brushing their teeth in 2 straight lines from Madeline, this is an illustration by Ludwig Bemelmans for the Book of Madeline. This has been in my brain since I was 4 years old.
Right.
So when I had the opportunity to sell it, I wasn't going home without this. I wasn't going home without it. So with Bemelmans, just like what we've discussed with Rockwell and Leyendecker, there's Saturday Evening Post and then there's everything else. With Sendak, there's Where the Wild Things Are and then everything else. With Jessie Wilcox Smith, there are her important illustrations, Goldilocks, 'Twas the Night Before Christmas and everything else. With Bemelmans, it's got to be about Madeline.
Right.
Right? So I needed, please, once I had the Sendak, I had to get a Madeline, right?
I would think so.
So yeah.
I would have been very, very disappointed if not.
There you go. Oh my God, I love this. I love this. And you know what I need to tell you? I got a lot to say. What I love about, I know, it's shocking, right? I know. Actually, there is a theory in Kabbalah that you are born with a certain amount of words that you can use in your life, and the minute you use them up, you're dead. I should have been dead 20 years ago, if you believe in that. Anyway, I digress. So, what I'm also really excited about here is that it is so important to me to bring art at every price point to the public. Some of our competitors focus only on the high ends, and that's great. I respect that, I love that. But what I love about Heritage is that we will always present masterworks at every price point. So in this sale, you will see really great illustration art in the $5,000 range. You will see it in the $4 to $6 million range. And you'll see it here too. I mean, this is $40,000 to $60,000, which of course is, a lot of money, but to be able to own a piece of history, to be able to own a museum quality work that is so important in the patchwork of our nation at this price point is so exciting to me.
To the price point question, I'm kind of interested. 40, 60 is the estimate.
Yes.
We like to say that an estimate is a starting point, is the beginning of the conversation. I expect you expect that to sell for more than 60,000.
I do. Listen, I look at estimates as a marketing tool. I always have. You want your audience to understand that you understand the importance of the work, but you also want to get that sweet spot where the estimate is still enticing enough to create competitive bidding. So that's the challenge. And estimates are subjective. It's not a price tag.
Everything is what 2 people are willing to pay for it.
That's exactly right. And based on our last sale with 180 something lots and we had over 1,000 bids, it's important. The competition is what drives the market. I'm drinking the auction Kool-Aid. That's the beauty of the auction process.
I mean, look, the fact is the Rockwell's estimated at 4 to 6. I look at this and go, why is that not 10? Why not 20? Why
Listen,
not 30?
I agree. I mean, if a Rothko for $50 million, wouldn't this be worth at least a fraction of that?
Right. If you can sell a baseball card for $6.6 million, that's a little.
This is it. This is one of the last chances to get one of the most important Rockwells.
This
out
is
there.
second only if Homecoming GI came to auction.
I know. It's homecoming.
Yeah.
It's homecoming.
Thanksgiving, in the sales just weeks before Thanksgiving.
I know.
I'm sure you planned it that way.
Obviously. Do I ever not plan out everything?
That is not correct. Thanks. Good luck.
Well, I'm thankful for you.
I'm very excited about all this.
Me too. I'm excited to be doing this with you.
To be in a room with this is, I have to say, now that we've done talking about it, just to sit here for a minute and realize that I'm just in a room with these pieces.
I know, you're in a little museum right now.
It's overwhelming.
In the best possible way.
Absolutely.
I know.
Thanks.
My pleasure.